I was going to say was, I mean, Ian was talking about the average price of a two-bedroom. I mean, let's say it's even less than 2,300. You know, let's just say for the sake of argument, it's $2,000 a month. Is the universal basic income going to cover that? I mean, that's the fact of the matter. Are you going to be able to keep within that 30% of your monthly income and still be able to buy groceries and have money to take the bus or put gas in your car? And the fact of the matter is, no, you're not, because no one who's put forward this UBI has considered these things, or if they have considered them, they just don't care. So, I mean, you know, universal basic income could definitely help working class people in a way, but it is in no way a solution to the unhoused population or the precariously housed population. No, I think definitely we'll need more systemic change.
Okay, and Ivan, you want to say something?
Yeah. I wanted to speak to this. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did that I wanted to say a little earlier was one of the things that we do as the Caracua Tenants Union of Tenants, is we are watching the municipal government and what they do, and we respond with policy proposals, and we organize other groups in town to sign on to these proposals, and we try to make them force the government to adopt them, right? So one of the early policy statements that we made was in regards to safe and free supply of opioids and other drugs, illicit drugs. So, you know, we have a history of advocating for services that are free, for free and safe drugs, because everybody that's on drugs right now, so this is in our platform, we're calling for this. So everyone that is on drugs, if those drugs were predictable and clean, they wouldn't be dying. Yeah. And if they were legal, if people didn't have to fight. So, you know, we're on record. This is in our platform. This is a long policy statement, you know, backed up with all kinds of facts. And I mean, even police boards are calling for decriminalization of drugs. So anyway, but the general statement, the point about this point here, about universal income, is that we are fighting for services. So if people have a roof over their head, if they have free food, which is another plank of our platform, if they have free transit, and if they have free drugs, then they don't really need money. If you give them money and none of these things, money can be gone very quickly, especially if they're addicted to illegal criminalized drugs, which are very expensive. So, you know, as Jacob said, if it's $5,000 per person a month indexed to inflation, cool. But still, if you're, you know, a cocaine addict, those who have doubled know that $5,000 is gone within a weekend. So, you know, it still wouldn't be enough. But again, it's how much, and the danger with most of the UBI models that have been advocated around Canada is that they tend to be an excuse to cut services. So, you know, if UBI means $1,000 a month and no services, hell no. If it means $5,000 and no services, hell no. If it means services and $5,000 a month for everybody, indexed to inflation, okay.
Interesting, yeah. In Britain, the big welfare reform was a universal credit, and many people said, "Oh, this is a great idea because it'll simplify the welfare system, and nobody has to go through all these weird, you know, hula hoops to get benefits for this and benefits for that." And on paper, it sounded like a good idea. Yeah, on paper, it sounded like a great idea, but now it's actually utter chaos because of the very thing you've just described. If a UBI is introduced, but we get rid of, you know, welfare as we know it. So I believe Sebastian, you want to chime in something, and then we'll have Ian and Keaton, if you want to also chime in, feel free.
Cool. So yeah, just to kind of echo what Jacob and Ivan have been saying, it's not that I think a UBI is a bad idea, but it does need to be accompanied by an increase of services to make sure that that money is money that is going into their pockets and just not immediately being sent off to their landlords. at that point, you might as well just be giving the money to the landlords directly. It's like, I think you were the one who used the word, it's a band-aid, not a solution. But I will kind of touch on a question you asked earlier, directed to Ian, talking about like how many kind of youth specifically are on the streets. I had a bit of a documentary radio series on a local station here called Crisis Watch Kingston for a little while last year. And some of the research that I did through that, there's a document called the Point in Time Count. I believe it's a document done by United Way, which has some issues with it. But one thing that it does reveal through the statistics that it gathers is that there are two types of homelessness in Kingston that we have a disproportionate amount of, far more than a city of our size should. Obviously, there shouldn't be anyone living on the streets, but proportional to other cities, we have a lot more women on our streets, and we have a lot more queer youth. So that's something I just wanted to kind of talk about for a minute, because Kingston does have a bit of an issue with human trafficking. I believe there was a story in the news very recently about several dozen charges being laid against one individual related to human trafficking. So that definitely affects women living on the streets of Kingston. And another one is, like I said, queer youths. There are far more queer youth living on the street in Kingston than there are in other cities of our size. And it's a really alarming issue, and we need to make sure that especially more vulnerable populations like that are being housed and protected.
Wow. And Keaton, do you want to, yeah, actually, Ian, did you want to add anything more than Keaton?
Yeah, so this is probably going to be the last thing I have time to say before I actually have to go. But you know, on the subject of universal basic income, I think I kind of want to echo what everybody else has said about the need to make sure that that doesn't have sort of a singular set amount and then require everybody else to pay for services. I mean, if you know, if the universal basic income is set at the same amount for everybody, that's going to not be fair when you have, say, somebody, you know, completely able-bodied, completely, you know, no major health issues, and then you have somebody with, you know, high prescription costs and you know, let's use I have an example of someone with a cocaine addiction. You know, maybe they have mobility issues and they need to spend a lot more money on aids, and those aids are not being provided. Then I think that definitely creates a bit of an issue. And beyond that, I also want to talk about when we talk about needing to index to inflation. I think Ivan touched on that briefly, and that's so very important, because we as a society have a lot of sort of numbers that have been set initially at what we thought would be sort of the necessity for survival. So if you look at something like the minimum wage, or rates for Ontario Works, or rates for Ontario, you know, ODSP, you know, these were all things that were set at one time as sort of this idea of like, this is enough to live on. And what we saw over the following years, and sometimes the following decades, was between them not keeping pace with inflation and some governments just flat out cutting them, it quickly ceased to be that. And so that's the one kind of, if it's not inherently indexed to inflation, that scares me is, you know, we've all lived through how many minimum wage fights, you know, where the government proposes raising it like a quarter and all the businesses cry foul, and, you know, everybody's out of touch great uncle around the, you know, dinner table starts ranting about how no one wants to work anymore, and then finally they succeed in raising it by a quarter, and by the time they do that, inflation has kept up so that raising it by a quarter is actually just to bring it back to what it was when we first started saying we should raise it by a quarter, and so on and so on. And so there's part of me that's and then we're not even having those conversations with Ontario Works and ODSP rates, because just flat out, like, no government is proposing we raise them at all, even, well, occasionally barely like half of what inflation is. You know, so when we talk about a universal basic income, that is the one thing that kind of gets the hair on the back of my neck standing up, is this question of, are we gonna have that same argument, you know, every 3 or 4 years, like, hey, it turns out universal basic income can't pay for rent anymore, we should probably raise it, and then, you know, 6 years later they raise it by, you know, $40 a month.
Interesting. Very, actually, thank you so much for saying that, because